I see a lot of people these days that are doing a lot of work and getting very little benefit out of the work that they're doing. And the work that they're doing isn't even bad work. They're often doing a good job with that work. As one example, because we talk about content way too much on this podcast, I'll add more to it. People all the time send me their Instagram page. They're like, hey, what could I be doing better on Instagram to whatever, get more clients, to build my business faster? And I look at their account and I'm like, no, this is fine. Like, your account's fine. Like, your content's fine. Like, this isn't the solution to your problem. It is to do a little bit better on Instagram. So we're going to talk about a system that I've developed over time to continually reprioritize my efforts and to make sure that at any given time I'm working on like the right things for where I want to go. And it's really hard to do that because it's very easy to add things to our plate and very hard to remove things from our plate. So that's what we're going to talk about today, how to kind of reverse the trend of being over busy and getting under results, which I don't know, I like that title a lot. Very proud of that one. But first, when I pick up the phone with you and I say ahoy hoy, do you know where that comes from?
I have no idea what that means.
So, you know in The Simpsons how Mr. Burns always says ahoy hoy when he picks up the phone? So that started when Conan O'Brien was one of the writers for The Simpsons. And it's because Conan O'Brien has this secret love for like old fogey English. And he came across this history book sometime or whatever. Basically, it talked about Alexander Graham Bell, who invented the telephone, a Canadian, by the way. We basically have Alexander Graham Bell and penicillin. That's what we have. And ice hockey. But did you know that our national sport is not even ice hockey? It's lacrosse.
Really?
Yeah. Weird, right?
Same thing, though.
I mean, nobody really knows what lacrosse is, so yeah, for all intents and purposes. Anyway, Alexander Graham Bell, when he created the telephone, apparently, supposedly, wrote out like an instruction booklet for how to use the phone.
Very nice.
And according to the literal inventor of the telephone, here is how you are supposed to answer the phone. Somebody calls you and you pick it up and you say, ahoy. And then they respond back to you and say, hoy. And then you start the conversation. That's, I mean, Amber, you're nodding your head no. I don't know if you know this. Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone, and that's how he said you had to use it. So if number 3 calls number 6...
No, I knew the ahoy story from that perspective, but like I didn't hear about the hoy part, the second, like the response to it. That's obnoxious.
Well, that's how you communicate with the other person that you are also there on the phone. And so
I'm glad we went with hello.
Oh, hi. You're supposed to say ahoy, and then the other person says hoy.
This is not something that I expected to be interacting with today.
Okay.
But thank you.
In South Park, because I'm sticking on these pop culture references, and not just current pop culture references, because I'm sticking on these pop culture references from the 1990s and early 2000s.
Pretty much.
In South Park, there's an episode that features a whole bunch of underpants gnomes, and they have a company. Okay? And what happens is Timmy, I don't even remember how it comes about, but they basically like kidnap Timmy or something. And then they take Timmy to their hideout. And it turns out that they're a company. And they've been stealing Timmy's underwear. And so Timmy, that's what happened. The boys follow them into like their like tree hideout because they're trying to figure out where Timmy's underwear keeps going. So they go to this hideout, right? And inside the hideout, there's a whole bunch of gnomes that are stealing underwear and putting it in a massive pile. Cutman's like, what the hell are you doing? Like, why are you stealing all this underwear? Like, oh, this is business. Step 1, steal underpants. Step 2, question mark, question mark, question mark. Step 3, and then everybody at once goes, profits. And what they're missing, of course, is that middle step.
any fucking plan is what they're missing.
that connects the underpants to the goal of the company of the underpants gnomes, which is profit. And you would think that at some point some wise old gnome would step up and say, yo, gnomies, we got a lot of underpants but very little profit. Maybe we should, I don't know, reestablish our priorities here with our business. But they don't. They continue to steal underpants because at this point, that's all they know. They're so dutifully collecting underpants that they've forgotten the fact that stealing underpants needs to turn into profit somehow, and they don't know how to make that connection. So this is a dumb shit example, but dumb shit examples are really, really good for illuminating grander points, which is one of the things that South Park is actually brilliant at. In this case, what happens often is there are a lot of people that are doing things like creating content, and even if they get good at this content creation, they have no idea how it connects to tangible business outcomes. Except it kind of becomes something that's just like something you do. And in many cases, people that I've seen, they've actually become pretty good at it. Even a lot of people who don't think that they're good at it often are quite good at it. You look. That's why, like, I look at their pages. I'm like, no, it's good. Like, you're doing a fine job. Like, your content is good. You have no clue how this content is going to question mark turn into profit, right? But your content's fine. Like, your messages are fine. You're engaging enough. You're a good enough writer. And even if you get better, it's not going to make that much of a difference. And so, at a certain point in time, what so often happens is we work really hard to get good at something without really knowing where it's going. But then the problem is we fall into a routine and we add more of that same thing into it, or we try to get better at that thing and we stop evaluating whether it's actually the best thing to do. Mm-hmm. There's a story from the company Intel. You know, they make like microprocessing chips and stuff like that, like computer company, right? And they used to make memory processors. What happened was that there was basically like some chairman of the board or something like that spoke to the CEO. I don't remember the specifics of it, but I just remember the story. And the question that he asked them, it was a challenging question. He said, you know, I guess the company was in trouble. They said, hey, if somebody were to buy this company right now, what's the first thing that person would do? Which is actually a good question. It's like, if somebody who wasn't me, who doesn't know anything of the history, would buy this company and objectively look at it and say, what's the first thing that we need to change? Like, what would that be? And so in their case, in Intel, it was the CEO responded, oh, he'd cancel a memory processor unit, like a unit that makes memory processors. And so this chairman said, why are you waiting for somebody to buy your company to do that then? And as the story goes, they canceled that unit. It was super painful. They had to lay off thousands of people, but the company grew and became way, 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 way stronger as a result. So the first question that I'll ask you, obviously you're not Intel, I'm not Intel, we're not anywhere close to that big, but the first question that I'll ask you is, if somebody were to buy your business today, what's the first thing that they change about it? Write that down. Ren, what would you say? Let's challenge you.
I don't know. I literally don't know. But only because I'm evaluating like every 6 months. I was once taught to put myself out of business. Always think about putting yourself out of business. How would you put yourself out of? Yeah, just thinking.
Because that's what we're gonna be talking about. Is evaluating every 6 months or so.
Just thinking about what could come along to put me out of business, and it's so ironic because when the pandemic happened, I had thought about that 6 months prior. In January of 2020, I told all my in-person clients that I was going online exclusively, right? January 2019, I told all of my clients that by January 2020, I was going online exclusively. Who knew? But what I thought was, man, if I get a flat tire, if I get incapacitated, if I get really ill, I'm out of business. How would I put myself? During the pandemic, I was thinking about what happens if the internet goes down. So I started researching all these CD labeling companies so I could send discs to clients anywhere.
fun.
Like I was looking at mail options, international shipping, how I would make everything that
internet
was
goes
digital
down.
physical. Yeah. So
So you're basically saying your process is every so often what you'll do is you'll evaluate where your vulnerabilities are.
yes,
And even in extreme circumstances. This
yes.
is what you're highlighting is a lot of what Nassim Taleb talks about in his books Anti-Fragile and Black Swan, which I definitely recommend to people in the opposite order, actually. Black Swan first, then Anti-Fragile.
Mm-hmm.
But he talks about how we actually need to plan for unpredictable events, and that's very rare to do. What often happens is we plan for the most extreme event that's already happened in history, not realizing that when that event happened, it was more extreme than the previous extreme event that's ever happened. So he's spoken about that with I think it was a really bad earthquake in Japan. I think it's the story that he tells. And what happened was a lot of the buildings weren't up to code because they built the buildings up to code for the previous worst earthquake that Japan had ever experienced. And of course, a worse earthquake than that happened. And it took out the buildings. So what you're talking about is like you didn't know a pandemic was going to happen, but you said, what are my vulnerabilities with this? How can I prepare for it? Even if you don't do anything, just almost as a thought experiment is really useful. I think about Amber, one of the Online Trainer Academy students, Rhonda, and her story was a couple years ago now. I remember doing an interview with her and I cried on the interview. And what happened was that she was an Online Trainer Academy student, but she was also a grandmother. And she had a daughter who, I don't know why or how or what happened, was separated, was not with the father of her grandchild anymore. Like, I don't know what happened. But her grandchild was born with special needs, like pretty serious disabilities, challenges. And her daughter was a single mom who worked a low income job, who didn't have any benefits or anything like that, who couldn't take like she was put out. She no daycares or anything was able to take her daughter because of these challenges. And Rhonda's daughter, so right, the mother of this child, couldn't stop working, or else she would be out on the street. And so what do you do? So Rhonda, because she wasn't fully online yet, but because she had gone ahead and proactively solved this problem by taking the Online Trainer Academy and starting with online training, for 2 years, every single weekend, flew back to her daughter during the week and spent the week helping take care of her daughter's daughter, while her daughter could go to work and make a living, until her granddaughter was old enough to be accepted into a program, basically. And she says, she's like, it wasn't easy. I worked in closets while my granddaughter was sleeping. I worked in airports, right? But I always remember that story because it illustrates that you just never know what's going to happen. And you can't assume that it's always going to be the best case scenarios. There's always going to be unpredictable stuff. And that's, I think, what you're illustrating, Ren. You didn't know that it was going to be a pandemic, right? Even in February of 2020, people were still ignoring that a pandemic was coming,
right,
and large. Even until, I remember standing in the co-working space, watching the TV as the Premier of Canada, Justin Trudeau, announced on the TV that businesses were shutting down. We didn't believe it until the minute we saw him say that on the TV. We ignored it. Right? Because this type of thing doesn't happen. It's never happened in our lifetime. So it doesn't exist in our world. But you were prepared, Ren, because you prepared for vulnerabilities in your business. Rhonda was prepared because she prepared for vulnerabilities in her business. I was prepared. The same thing. because I've always just done that. I've always built those redundancies in the stuff that I've done. I didn't plan on talking about this part, but I'm glad that we did. Do you have a process for figuring out where these potential vulnerabilities might be?
I start with the distribution channels for whatever I'm doing, right?
What
So
does that mean?
since I'm business to consumer, right? I'm B2C. I start with how I get the thing to the person and how they get the money to me. What are the channels of distribution?
So when you're in person with a client, your distribution is literally you there saying,
Right
you do
there.
this thing, I'm going to queue you, whatever. If you're online, your distribution is sending the workout across QuickCoach. Your payment is however you're taking the payment, PayPal, Stripe, whatever,
Yeah,
right?
right. And fundamentally, it's the internet, right? Fundamentally, it's technological communication systems that I have access to now,
Right.
right? So I'm always wondering, what if that line of contact, that distribution channel, if I was shipping stuff,
Right.
from China, I'd be thinking about the waterways, right? If
Right.
if I was, FedExing it air, I'd be thinking, what if all planes go down? Like what, like I'm just constantly thinking about how would somebody or something put me out of business or squeeze me to the past the point of comfort, where I'd have to take some radical action to keep going. And I think most entrepreneurs, I would hope that most entrepreneurs do that. Better rephrase that. If you're going to be an entrepreneur, you probably need to be a less of a pie in the sky entrepreneur
Right.
and more of a how could this shit explode entrepreneur.
Well, it seems insane to think that the internet could have problems,
It does.
but everybody's like, oh no, I'm saving this in the cloud. It's like, no. The cloud is just somebody else's fucking computer. You
Right.
realize that?
Right.
Like that's what the cloud is. Like the cloud is somebody else's computer somewhere else. like that's how it
Right.
works. Um, there are people now who are doing their own backups on their own computers in their own homes, but I think that that's interesting, and I've never thought about approaching it from that standpoint of what are the two most important things for my business, right? Is the medium with which I deliver my product or service. So like, how does my thing get to the human buying the thing?
Mm-hmm.
And then the medium through which they provide me some sort of compensation. However that compensation is set, whether that is money, whether they're sending me dollars, whether they're sending Bitcoin, whether
Right.
they're sending some sort of other mode of compensation, whether it's a sweat equity or whatever it is, right? Which, I mean, I think those types of deals are great. Like I'm kind of a socialist a little bit. I think we should trade a lot more than buy. I think that
Right.
we should share a lot more than own. I don't own a weed whacker in my house. I own a big property with a lot of grass. The only reason that we own our own lawnmower is because the people who we bought the house from left it here for us. And it's like a shitty old lawnmower. and I refuse to buy a weed whacker. You don't know why? Because
No,
3 of my
John.
fucking neighbors have one. Like, why do I like? How ridiculous is it that every house needs to own a weed whacker? It's insane. Like, I mean, it's not a money thing to me. It's a waste thing. It's crazy that all of these things. So I do think that certain types of sweat equity and sharing type deals can be really, it's a good deal for everybody. And also there's a lot less fees. I mean, I think about all the fees that I pay payment processor companies and stuff like that. We'll pay $70,000, $80,000 a year in payment processing. What a ridiculous income leak. Just so that somebody else like lets us take money. Crazy. Just a
Right.
crazy idea. So you do it. It's. I'm so interested that you do that, and you think about distribution networks because I've never had a way to kind of verbalize my approach.
Mm-hmm.
Because I wouldn't say it's exactly every 6 months. It's probably I probably work on like an 8-4 because I do it every time I go away for the winter and then every time I come back for the winter. And I usually go away for 4 or 5 months. So I'm home in Toronto for 8 months and then I'm gone again for 4 months. Like this winter, I'm going January 1st, we're going to Nicaragua for a month and a half, and then we're going to Mexico straight from there for another 2 months or so. And so when I leave, I wipe my calendar clean as much as possible. We'll probably keep the podcast on the schedule at the same time. But when I leave, I wipe my calendar clean. And I also wipe my priority list clean. So everything that I'm doing, I write down. And then I write down everything else that I think that I should be starting to do. And I reprioritize it from first principles. I.e., if I wasn't doing any of this stuff before based off of where I am now in my business, based off of where I want to go in my business, what is my priority sequence now moving forward? And then I slot that into my calendar, big rocks first, down to little rocks, priority sequence into my calendar again anew. And I do that twice a year, and I've done that twice a year, every year for the last 11 years that I've gone away for the winter. Over time, what happens then is the priorities just get better and better and better and more clear. But also, the shit that accumulates over time, because this is what I said in the introduction to this podcast. I think so. I have it down in my notes. I don't know whether I said it or not. But this idea of we're very, very good at figuring out stuff to do and doing that thing often. We're very bad at actually replacing something else that we no longer need to do with that. And so what happens is we just accumulate more and more and more and more. We do this in our lives too. I mean, I lived for 7 years. I didn't own anything. Nothing. It's when people ask me what I think contributed to any amount of success I have financially, business-wise, personal, like with fitness. For 7 years, I owned nothing. We came back to Toronto in the summers. I rented a car, and I rented a beater. Like, I love driving around in a shitty car. Like, the car shook when I was on the highway. Like, it wasn't like a nice car, right? I rented a car, and we rented a condo, a furnished condo in the summer. And then we'd go away in the winter, and I'd give back the keys to both, and I'd throw my backpack on my shoulders, and Allison would too, and we'd kick off in the winter and we'd go live somewhere. And the same type of thing. We'd rent a vehicle wherever we were, whatever the vehicle was, right? Whether it was a motorbike in Southeast Asia, or whether it was an ATV in Costa Rica, or now a golf cart in Mexico. We'd rent whatever the vehicle was, and a place to stay. And there was no accumulation there because I needed to physically carry everything that I owned on my back. When you have to do that, you think pretty carefully about the stuff that you own. But there was also no life accumulation. Something breaks, light bulb goes out, right? You call light bulbs we fix. But like something breaks, whatever. You call somebody else to say it's your problem. Didn't have any stuff that I needed to figure out. I have a $2,000 camera that I never figured out how to use. I just haven't gotten around to selling it. Stupid thing. It's just sitting here. It's just like one more thing to do. Like, there's just like, you collect stuff over time. For 7 years, I never had that. How much more clarity, mental clarity, time, physical clarity did I have over those 7 years? To think about the problems I was solving, to read more books, to go deeper with Allison. Maybe sexual, not sexual, also kind of sexual.
That's enough. Pipe down.
I'm going to let that one settle for a second.
It's quite enough, Jonathan.
And you might be in a position to do this now, you might not. But one of the things that I've realized is that, since we bought a house, whatever it was, 4 years ago now, we bought this house. Man, if we're not careful, stuff just collects. Holy crap, especially when you have kids, man, stuff collects. And it's just funny. It's so hard to part with it. Like I bought there's a like super old dude who runs some Italian like used espresso machine spot. Random, like totally random. Like for some reason he's here, like a couple blocks away from us. And I was walking by one day, so I bought like a really nice used coffee grinder and espresso maker and stuff like that. And I use the coffee grinder every day because fresh ground coffee beans are amazing. But the espresso maker I just never really used. I was like, I'm not making espresso like in the morning. Like, not that fancy, man. And so I just never used it. And so it just sat in the basement. This is like a $200-300 machine used. Like it's not like a cheap machine. There are much more expensive ones. And I met a neighbor, and the neighbor was walking back with an espresso one day. And I was like, oh, do you like espresso? His name's Maurice. He's a grandfather. He's like, I love espresso, but I don't really have it at home too often because we brought the machine to my cottage. And so, sometimes I love going out for the espresso. I'm like, oh, I have a machine. I'll give it to you. And I just gave him the machine. And then he came over with like a toy truck for Calvin, which was really nice. But it was so hard to part with that machine, even though it had sat in my basement gathering dust for 2 years. I just think we need to carve out time to just say, like, this is time for me to look forwards and not backwards with stuff also. But again, I also understand that I'm kind of a socialist that way, and I guess minimalist, if you were to call it that. But I never had when that idea of like the distribution channels. Like for me, it was always, there was never any strict system of, okay, how am I actually reprioritizing this stuff?
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty cool.
But you got great instincts from incidents, right? Like when you're living through these things,
Right.
you don't. I think that you need a system to introduce you to a methodology if you haven't lived through enough situations to build the methodology on your own, right? But when you're actually like we said in our chat the other day, when you've done some shit, you can do shit because of the shit you've done, right? So the fact that you've actively been solving problems and
Sure.
changing and shit like that counts a lot more, I think, than having a specific, definable, determinable system that you can easily explain. You sort of, it's like music for me. Like you sort of feel your way through it after having so much experience.
Yeah, you can. I mean, Malcolm Gladwell talks about this all the time in Blink, one of his famous books. I think that was the one that came out after Tipping Point. But it's all about just this unconscious, almost immediate reaction when somebody's an expert in the thing. Mm-hmm. That they can't even describe it. He gives the example of, I think, a museum expert who looked at a statue that the museum had just gotten in and said, that's fake. Yeah, multi-million-dollar statue, right? And he's like, that's fake. Nobody else thought that it was fake. And he couldn't even say why it was fake. But it turns out he was right. He just knew. And I've had this. You've probably had this too, and I'll be working out with a friend of mine. I remember I was working out with Andreas in Mexico. Andreas, Swedish guy, his family's there all the time. And we were at the gym together. We were working out, and he was doing deadlifts. He was working on some online program or something he was following. I was doing my own thing. But he was doing deadlifts. And I just took one look at him, and I was like, move your feet out like that, do this, grip the bar like that. Boom. Crank the deadlift properly. I've seen and worked with thousands of bodies doing movements like that. After I took a step back and I thought about it, I'm like, oh, okay. And then I did like some assessments on him to prove it out. But I was like, okay, he probably has tight hip joint. He's not actually gripping and taking the slack out of the bar properly. Mm-hmm. Like, that's probably what's going on. And then I did some hip tests to figure out, yeah, like his hip joint is tight, and so he needs to be whatever. I tuned out a little bit more. But I couldn't even verbalize those things when I first saw him doing the thing. You just kind of get it after you do the thing, and this is more testament to what we were talking about in the episode the other day with like the stories of like why you just go out and do things. One of the can I share what I figured out about myself? I don't know. I think it will probably help people because Amber, you particularly, I'd be interested to know whether this resonates. But it seems like, I know how much you love me calling on you, Amber, which is why I'm going to give you a few minutes. It seems to me like the biggest need these days for a lot of people trying to grow, trying to accomplish something, trying to build a following, build a business, whatever they're trying to do. It seems like the biggest need is they just need space to figure it out. They need space, they need breaths, right? And space could be financial space, space could be time, space could be permission to take the time to play around and figure out that thing. Do you think that's a global thing, or do you think, I mean, that was what I needed for sure 2 years ago, call it a year and a half ago.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, how many projects have I talked about where I just don't have the time or space to work on it that I would love to? I have tons of half-finished projects just because of that alone.
Yeah.
But all of our students, it's the same thing. They don't have the financial ability to buy themselves more time, or don't have time because of family obligations, or they work stupid hours and they're exhausted. I think it's 100% right.
And
is it that they actually have to be working those hours, or is it that there's a lot of time that they're working that they're not getting enough benefits out of, and so they look back? Like, I even get this sometimes. We talked about this, Amber, when we did that conversation with Gloria Mark, who's wonderful. She's the chancellor's professor and heads up the informatics department at the University of California. And so her research is in the intersection between technology and human. She's one of the leading researchers, and that's specifically on attention and focus. And she talked about how it's not a bad thing to get lost in the internet, but you need to have guide rails on it. And one of the best ways to have guide rails is actually to have like some end time that you can't change. So if you're going to screw around on social media, let's say, do it when you have a meeting in 10 minutes, for example, because then you're going to do it for 10 minutes and that's fine. Those rote tasks that you're not really thinking about, but not really not thinking about, can actually be very healthy to our mental well-being, so long as we don't just get lost in them. Is it, do you like is it that, but because I kind of said to her, I was like, okay, well, like, sometimes I look back at the end of the day and I'm like, God, it's 5 o'clock. Like, what did I do today, man? Like, what did I do? Is that happening, or are they really, like, it's really just they're parents and busy with work and there's just no
Well, I think
space?
it's that, but also, like, there's a lot of invisible labor. And so I think it's easy to forget what you did get done because there's no tangible effect, right? And so
invisible labor. I feel like that is a brilliant name for a book.
It's awesome.
Every mom knows that term. Like, ask Allison. Like, invisible labor is what, like, moms will complain about all the time. It's in line with
what's an example?
So, for example, knowing that your household is out of toilet paper and adding it to the shopping list. You just know that thing, right? And so, but for a business owner, it would be, I reached out to so-and-so and said hi, or I came up and thought about this really great idea for a program or a naming structure for, whatever. That kind of stuff that doesn't necessarily have, like, it takes time to do, but the tangible outcome is either non-existent or very small. And then you question, why did I spend so much time on that? But sometimes a small thing can take forever.
So much on this. She'll, like, Oh my god, she'll search for stuff endlessly to try to find like the best deal on a thing. I'm like, baby, you're exhausted. It's 10:30 at night. You're sitting on your phone in bed. You know that the kids are going to be up 5 times tonight. It's $10. Just buy the thing. Let's go to sleep. Like,
Principle of the matter.
but I get it. And so here's the name of your book, Amber, that
There
you
you
need
go.
to write.
Invisible Labor.
Invisible Labor, the busy mom's guide to getting shit done.
Oh
Or
Lord.
how about the working mom's guide?
There you go. There's
That's actually like super compelling. Like that
Yeah.
title. The best titles in the world are titles that seem like they're not connected, but are connected.
yeah.
And so, Atomic Habits, The War of Art. I spoke to Ashley today, who I know, who's in a mentorship, and we had just a phone call, just like a walking, chatting phone call about like her positioning in her brand, because she's like me in that she loves to explore a bunch of different things, and how do you like align these things into some platform on the front versus, because that could be very difficult, can't it? You have all these things you're interested in, ways you get your clients results, but you can't talk about all of them on social media. You can only talk about really one or two things. And so, she was telling me about all of the stuff that she's interested in stuff, and I was like,
Yeah,
all
she's
right.
brilliant. Love her.
She is. So here's kind of what we came to is some sort of, instead of like the I help so and so do so and so, this is like her I help statement. It's like, hey, I'm Ashley. I'm a girl who loves energetic crystals and lifting heavy shit up and down.
Oh,
If you like those two things too, let's explore them together.
yeah.
And it's
Nice.
just, you think about those two things, it's like crystals and energy and healing.
Woo woo.
And just like
Yeah.
being a badass and hitting it and going forward
Yeah.
and lifting heavy shit in the gym. And it's like, they're not connected. You think that they're not connected, but they actually are connected in one of the most age-old ways in humanity, which is the yin and the yang. Right, the grounding, the up in the sky. Like you need both to be a complete human. And so I think it's perfect to go together, but it doesn't seem like it goes together, and that's why I really like this idea of invisible labor.
Yeah, for sure.
It makes a lot of I like that. So there's your book, Invisible Labor: The Working Mom's
Perfect.
Guide to Getting Shit Done. Dear listener, you're going to hold Amber accountable to writing this book
Oh
by
God.
the year
I
2025.
already have projects.
There could be a pineapple on the cover.
Oh my!
There's pineapples everywhere. But like another really, like, I literally have pineapples everywhere. Another big thing too is like, there's more. There's more.
Oh, I know.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I know.
Don't show me
I live
more
in the
of it, 'cause
South.
then we'll fight.
I know. I live in the South. That's a big thing. But also, I think a big problem is like people feel like if they're not grinding, then they're behind, right? And
Right.
so, like, that would be a great question. I think is like, how do they know when it's okay to let it go? Like, there's a difference between I'm doing stuff and it's not working yet versus I need to grind harder. And I think everyone just defaults, oh, it hasn't worked in like 3 weeks. I must not be, working hard enough, and that's most of the time not the answer.
I don't have a good answer for this. I have a good process for this, I think, because it's my process.
Yeah.
But Wen, do you have a good answer for this? Because I don't have a good answer for this.
This is where I default to coaching, right? Because this parallels so much what people do with their fitness, right? People feel like, okay, I can't relax around my nutrition at all because I've got to be incredibly restrictive, and that's the only way it'll work. And when John talked about people giving themselves permission, one of the things that I fall into a lot with my clients is giving them permission to choose what they want to eat outside of any pre-conceptualized food rules per se, and people freak out, right? They freak out because we don't believe, because of social media and society and hustle mentality, hustle porn, whatever you want to call it, we just don't believe that you can throw an action out into the pond and an actual ripple comes back to you. We feel like you got to jump in the damn pond, swim all around it, swim back and forth, drink all the water in the pond, pee it all out and swim in it again. Like, and people just can't conceptualize that you can do something and you don't have to do it all the time.
I
And
saw
there
the
is
funniest meme.
yeah, just
Can I tell you about the funniest meme? And then I want to get back to what you're saying.
Please do. Let it out, John.
It said, if you feel like you're useless, just remember, there's bathrooms at public pools.
Right. That's exactly why I don't get in public pools. That's exactly why. I haven't even been in my apartment community pool because I see the people in there and they don't get out all day, but they drink all day. And I'm no dummy. Right? I know what that means. Like, the bathroom's right there, bro, but you just went through a six-pack in the pool. And there was one point where your eyes glazed over, and that was probably you going pee-pee. So I don't get in it. That's the absolute truth. But what I was saying was, you don't always have to be doing something. Sometimes you have to do something and then observe something and then decide if there's something else to be done and then decide to do it. People overrun their own results with more activity before they figure out if the first activity worked. And that sort of speaks to what Amber's saying, because our coaches that we mentor all the time, they want to be doing something. I think this is why we always get conversations about content, because it's the easiest something that you could be doing.
And you could never be done.
You'll never be done. And it doesn't really
You can never be done. It's never enough, and it's never good enough.
It's never good enough. So it gives them something to do, something to obsess over.
Yeah. So I struggle with this, but I feel like I've gotten better with this over time. To me, it comes down to the single problem of stuff you do for immediate gain versus stuff you do to prepare for an unknown future. And the unknown future has to include some element of belief in the process, some element of randomness, of luck, of actions that are not going to provide you any benefit, which is like, if you think about it, 98% of school. But do you look back at school and say it was a waste? I mean, I don't. I don't look back on my year-long children's literature course that I took in university as an elective as a waste. Have I used it? Not really. But at the same time, it helped me understand storytelling. It helped me understand a lot of the really great didactic stories, like all of the Brothers Grimm kind of folk tales, which are, the Fox and the Grapes, where we yearn for things and then we can't quite reach them, and so we say that we didn't want them because we can't reach the grape. The Boy Who Cried Wolf, all those types of things. And the rabbit, the tortoise, and the hare story. But so it wasn't a waste. So I think a lot of the time it's not a waste, even if we can't immediately look back and say this led to this, which led to that, which helped me with this. I think that's just part of this beautiful human experience what did I say on that call with Gloria, Amber? I call it strategic inefficiency. I mean, it's to me, that's what it is. To me, it's kind of beautiful. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but that's not particularly helpful to you. But I do think that it's important. I also think it's important, and I say this over and over again, to look backwards from problems and not forwards from solutions. And part of that is really understanding the world around us. And that takes time to figure out. Where is your element of advantage? Where can you have leverage? And that is, the more random bits of knowledge and understanding and experiences that you can have, the more you're going to have an advantage. But I also read a lot of memoirs. I read a lot of biographies. And I look for patterns amongst people who have stood out, right? Like people who have done things that are great. One of the main patterns is that they set aside significant amounts of time to read. And they did this all the way up. Bill Gates takes a week at a time, multiple times a year, and takes his little private jet to some private plane to some cabin in the middle of nowhere, and his fridge is filled with Diet Cokes. Did you not? And he has piles of books. And he spends a week reading. Warren Buffett says the same thing. Basically just sits and reads all day. Because you really don't need to make very many decisions. You really don't need to do too many things in this world where there's so much leverage in terms of help that you can get from contractors, in terms of code that you can leverage, right? Even using like quote unquote no code tools like Canva or any of these WordPress or website developers or social media. I mean, you're basically leveraging computer code. Mm-hmm. You might not be writing the code, but you're leveraging computer code, and that's helping you establish levels of scale that previous generations have never had access to. So you don't need to make a lot of moves. You just need to make the right moves in kind of the right way. And so in order to do that, it's often comes down to a lot of reading. So I look for these types of patterns. And you see that over and over and over and over again. Is this the majority of the time of these people is spent reading or is spent in deep conversation with basically colleagues, acquaintances, stuff, right? Like learning, call it learning. And what I found is that the more that I go through this process where twice a year, call it 8-4, twice a year where I reestablish and my priorities and reset my schedule, the more open time I free up to just read and write. To the point where now I have 3 full days open every single week. My Mondays, my Thursdays, and my Fridays don't have a single thing booked. And I read and I write. Because I think about, and that's not like like an immediate profit maximization. That's saying, how can I ensure that no matter what, I'm always going to be able to succeed, to do well in whatever I do? That probably also means that, especially in the immediate time, I'm not going to be able to win as big as I might otherwise win because I'm not putting in as much work. You think about what we're doing with Quick Coach, Amber, right? If we put in a lot more work marketing this thing, we would get way more users today. But you know how many books I've read, how many people I've spoken to about product decisions, about SaaS, software as a service applications, about how to engineer things in terms of jobs to be done, in terms of the actual problem they're solving from a first principles approach. Hundreds of hours. And that's why our service is so exceptional. Devoid of the marketing, right? And that's why we're going to win long term. Other people might win too. I don't think it's a zero-sum game. But that's also why we're not going to blow past the competition in the short term. I mean, there's another service out there that just spams the shit out of the Reddit forums. There's a different service out there that spams the shit out of Facebook groups. Like they sure have people that just have notifications turned on anytime anybody talks about anything in any of those places. They just pump their thing in there, right? They're probably going to get more users in the short term. But if that's what they're focusing on when their product is in its infancy, odds are it's not going to be as good long term. Maybe it will, who knows? So I think about 3 questions when I think about this problem that I wrote down for you. The first question is, and this is where I talk about a process, right? The first question is, where do I want to go? The second question is, what will it take to get there? And the third question, which is the most important question, is, what am I willing to give up in exchange? If you answer those questions honestly and use them as kind of a guiding principle as you're prioritizing your time and your efforts, I think you'll get a lot of clarity. For me, the clarity was, I want as much time as humanly possible to read books and write. because where do I want to go? I want to sell 1 million copies of my next book. And I don't want that to be my best-selling book. There's 20 books a year that sell 1 million copies. The odds of that happening are ridiculous. Might happen, right? But the odds of that happening are ridiculous. But if I set a goal to sell 1 million copies, it's going to be way easier to sell 250,000, isn't it? But in order to get there, I have to be willing to give up in exchange a lot of short-term benefits of marketing my existing products and programs. Neither's better or worse. But what do you want to get out of this thing? Should I recommend another episode? Do you guys have anything to add to any of this?
No, I got nothing.
Cool. All right. Let's recommend another episode. If you're looking for another episode to listen to on the Obvious Choice podcast, thank you for listening, by the way. I'm going to recommend episode 91. It's called Pull Your Business Out of a Hole. This is an episode for you if you feel like you're kind of stuck. If you feel like what you're doing just doesn't seem to be getting you the benefits that you want it to be getting and you can't quite figure out how. Definitely scroll back in wherever you're listening to this podcast and find episode 91. It's called Pull Your Business Out of a Hole. I think that you'll enjoy it. And as always, thank you so much for listening. I think we're officially past episode 100 now, which is super cool.
Ooh,
I don't know when we passed it,
nice.
but this is fun, and this continues to be fun, which is exciting. So, Ren, Amber, appreciate you guys.
Great job, guys.
Good job, guys.
Way to go.
Good job, team. Yay, team. We should start a chant. Everybody put in your hands.
Did I put my hand in? You can't see.
Put your hand in. Put your hand in. I got my hand in.
I can't see. Okay, there's my hand.
Obvious choice on 3. 1, 2, 3. Obvious choice.
Thank you, Amber, for your
Thanks, Amber.
participation.
Thanks, Amber.
So cringe.